So assume that you're working with a potentially flawed engine with potentially flawed training data. How will you handle it on the back end? When you receive output, putting in place mechanisms to ensure that the responses are valid and accurate and legitimate. What does responsible AI or ethical AI mean for a business? When we talk about it here, we're going to focus on ethical governance and fairness. We have ethics, transparency, and accountability. Each touches on both legal and operational issues. We will highlight the three primary concerns with AI that necessitate this heightened awareness of responsible AI use. First concern is bias. Organizations have to actively work to reduce and attempt to eliminate algorithmic bias and data bias. The two are two sides of the same coin. Algorithmic bias is where the code reflects bias of people who built or trained the models. Data bias is where training data is unrepresentative. AI systems can overly rely on information and data from outdated sources that they're programmed to use in generating outputs. This can lead to reinforcing historical prejudice against humans, but also prejudice towards different business models or unintentional prejudice towards old policies and procedures that you had in place, even if you have fixed them. Racial bias is also baked into a lot of AI engines, and part of it is because of having training data that doesn't include a representative sample of the population. And it can lead to generalizations. So if 80% of your training data is based on one race and 1% of it is based on another race, that's not a representative sample, and any conclusions you could draw about that 1% might be wrong. In terms of AI bias, some examples are gender stereotype. So AI engines often associate the word nurse with a female and the word doctor with males. And when a lot of AI engines are asked to generate an image of an engineer, they will generate an image of a male. And this is the same for other predominantly male occupations. My side note or snide note is that there's plenty of bias outside of AI. So I do believe it's important to recognize the bias that can exist in AI and try to eliminate it. But we are also human, and humans are creating the engines. So in some ways, it's going to be virtually impossible to completely eliminate bias. So it's important to have bias screening for output. So assume that you're working with a potentially flawed engine with potentially flawed training data. How will you handle it on the back end? When you receive output, putting in place mechanisms to ensure that the responses are valid and accurate and legitimate is important. So that was the first of the concerns we have to deal with, bias. The second concern with AI that we've got to mitigate against in order to responsibly use AI is the black box. This is the focus of some recent legislative proposals in the US, also outside the country, but consumer protection agencies and law enforcement agencies are concerned with making sure that users are not duped by thinking that some output, some research is based on humans doing research when it really is just AI. Users need to be informed when they're interacting with AI. Responsible use involves clearly disclosing how consumer data is being used, or at least allowing individuals to opt out of their data being collected for use in an AI tool, project, engine, etc. Also, organizations have to be able to explain how and why an AI system reached a specific conclusion to avoid this black box problem. And in a lot of cases, you'll see model cards being developed where an organization, an AI company or a company with an AI tool or anything you're developing internally under AI includes model cards that explain the logic behind decisions, the data that went into it, and the training process so that you can evaluate if you're comfortable with it or not. The third is impunity. We talked about in the first episode how one of the concerns with AI that makes people freak out a little bit is the fact that it might be in control over humans and that humans can't stop AI, or that humans won't be able to predict or know what AI is doing. That relates to AI having impunity and not being responsible for anything it does. So if an AI tool might infringe on your rights or your safety, humans need to be accountable for that and explain it and understand it instead of heavily relying on automation. So the antidote to impunity is accountability. Organizations need to be aware that they remain liable for the output of an AI tool. And that's not just organizations that create the AI tools. For example, if your external audit company uses AI when doing its work for you, it is responsible for the output that happens and needs to check it and make sure there's what's sometimes referred to as human in the loop. So there's oversight to validate decisions that will prevent this over-reliance on automation that could end up infringing on rights and safety or just being plain old wrong. AI, we should think of it as decision support for humans as opposed to the decision maker. The easiest way I can think of it in terms of AI helping me do my work is that it makes relevant information easily accessible and well organized so that I can make better decisions more quickly and take actions accordingly, as opposed to having AI do research for me, give me a conclusion, and put it into action. Decoding cyber law is going to help set you up for success in using AI, developing AI, and managing your vendors and your service providers who use AI. Once you listen to our podcasts this season, you will have a much better sense of bias, transparency, accountability, and how all of those factor into your overall AI governance and plan. The easiest way to get started with this is through your company policies. They're a key tool to effectively establish an environment where responsible use thrives. Often you can start with your existing policies, and we will cover those in a later episode. Thanks for listening to another episode of Decoding Cyber Law. If you've got questions, check out the show notes, go to our website, or feel free to message me on LinkedIn.